which case, welcome and have a nice I thought what I might do is just read you a section and then open it up to questions. The God of the Hive is a book that started with the very ending of the last book, The Language of Bees. And I will try not to give away any spoilers in case you haven't read The Language of Bees. But that book ends with the various characters going off in different directions, so that at the final scenes of that, you have Russell going off in one direction with this small child. You have Holmes going off in a boat with his son, who has been injured. And you're not quite sure where the rest of the characters are, including the villain. So that I was forced, when I started this book, to deal with the fact that there's been this sort of explosion of characters, and they're all flying off in different directions. Well, when you start a book like that, the idea of having Mary do her normal narration of the entire book, first person, just didn't really work, because there'd be so much laborious explanation of how she came to find out what Holmes was doing and what that person was doing. I thought, oh, the hell with it. Make it multiple viewpoints. So that's what you get with this one. You get 5 major viewpoints, one other viewpoint, and at one point you have a chapter that's narrated by a bird in a tree. So there's a tree to look forward to. Laurie King tweeting. I just couldn't resist. Mary Russell's what I tweet. I hope you all know that Mary Russell, who has now turned 110, is very active on Twitter. So, yeah, you see? So that if any of you are on Twitter, make sure you hunt down Russell, because she always has interesting things to say. Usually rude when it comes to me. She doesn't like the fact that I take credit for her memoirs. Anyway, so I will read a section. Because this is multiple points of view, the beginnings start with each of the characters getting a brief 2 or 3 pages to set up where they're going. And as I said, Holmes is on a fishing boat with his son Damien, who was injured at the end of The Language of Bees. The change of tack quieted the boat's wallow considerably. When Holmes descended again to the cabin, the stillness made him take 2 quick steps to the bunk, but it was merely sleep. The madman's bullet had circled along Damien's ribs, cracking at least one before burying itself in the musculature around the shoulder blade, too deep for amateur excavation. Had it been the left arm, Holmes might have risked it, but Damien was an artist, a right-handed artist, an artist whose technique required precise motions with the most delicate control. Digging through muscle and nerve for a piece of lead could turn the lad into a former artist. Were Watson here, Holmes would permit his old friend to take out his scalpel, even considering the faint hand tremor he'd seen the last time they had met. But Watson was on his way home from Australia. Holmes suspected a new lady friend, and was at the moment somewhere in the Indian Ocean. He could only hope that Wick's medical man had steady hands and didn't drink. If they were not so fortunate, he would have to face the distressing option of coming to the surface to summon a real surgeon. Which would Damien hate more? The loss of his skill, or the loss of his freedom? It was not really a question. Even now, Holmes knew that if he were to remove the wedge holding the cabin's hatch open, in minutes Damien would be sweating with horror and struggling to rise, to breathe, to flee. No, a painter robbed of his technique could form another life for himself. A man driven insane by confinement could not. If they found no help in Wick, he might have to turn surgeon. The thought made his gut run cold. Not the surgery itself, he'd done worse, but the idea of Damien's expression when he tried to control a brush and could not. Imagine Sherlock Holmes dodging responsibility. Standing over his son's form, he became aware of the most peculiar sensation, disturbingly primitive and almost entirely foreign. Reverend Thomas Brothers, or James Harmony, Hayden, or Henry Smythe, or whatever names he had claimed, lay dead among the standing stone circle. But had the corpse been to hand, Sherlock Holmes would have ripped out the mad bastard's heart and savagely kicked his remains across the deck and into the sea. The clever young man stood at the wide window with a glass in his hand, looking through his reflection at midnight London. Standing as he was, his head's shadow engulfed most of the Houses of Parliament. The white streak over his temple engulfed most. The white streak over his temple overlaid the face of its famous clock. His chest engulfed Westminster Bridge and the hungry, flat, greasy River Thames, while his right raised elbow rested on the palace of the Archbishop. God of all he surveyed. His presence in this place was a quirk, an anomaly that would have surprised all who knew him were they ever to be invited here. Grey and invisible minions of government did not live among the warehouses of London's South Bank, no more than did men whose ambitions encompassed government as his reflection encompassed Whitehall. Not that any of his colleagues knew of his ambitions, any more than they knew of his home. The building had belonged to his grandfather, who had lost it, or from whom it had been stolen, along with the rest of the family inheritance. The grandson was on medical leave in 1917, following the bullet that left him with a streak of white in his hair, when his restless wanderings brought him here, to an empty and derelict warehouse, part of its roof taken off by a Zeppelin attack. He had made a surreptitious and scandalously low offer for it, a steal, one might say, and in his first deliberate act of self-concealment, became its owner. After the Paris talks, he'd returned to London in a new position, and now he stood at the big north-facing window in the modern flat raised up from the top floor, his outline a frame over the powers of empire. So appropriate, that dim outline. Nothing overt, no splashes of the politician's mark or estate magnate's hammer, merely a shadow coloring all it overlay. So there are two of the five major voices that you will meet.